Hal Strunk is a doctor of public health and a retired Navy captain who wrote a book, literally, on infectious diseases of the Arabian Peninsula. And he was the operations officer for the medical activities during the Gulf War. Hospital administrator. He is not a physician, but I am learning a great deal about the medical application of things, and specifically, as in one of these, how to treat nerve gas poisoning and how to detect and treat the biological agents. So I'm getting a great deal more recognition of something I've talked with some of you about, and that those who are not physicians frequently can understand some of these things better than we physicians can. Some of the other things that I've heard Dr. Hal Strunk for this presentation is becoming acquainted with the present president of the Sudan and a sponsor of terrorists, and having been with Palestine Liberation Organization at its 20th anniversary, and being a member of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, so he does understand terrorism, as well as infectious and biological and chemical agents. Dr. Hal Strunk.
Just give me a second to get set up here. I figure with all the tough stuff you've been listening today, you might as well get a laugh. Some of you will be interested in how do you treat nerve gas poisoning, how do you obtain supplies, what else can I read to find out more about this subject. And let me just say that I've got a lot of handouts. I'll put them up on the table. Please help yourself. Of course, the title of my subject is the threat. I must tell you that there's a lot of people at high levels in the government that really don't think that there is any chemical or biological threat. I'd like to read you a couple of things just to back that up. Officials say future attacks on urban targets might easily result in civilian casualties from a few thousand to the low millions. Paralysis and hysteria would overrun municipal and state governments, police and firefighters, hospitals and transportation. Food and water sources would be contaminated, power lost, medical supplies exhausted, vaccine stockpiles drained. An entire urban population could be brought to its knees by the federal government might face multiple and coordinated urban attacks across the country. The Pentagon and other federal agencies could be swamped with emergency demands for help at home while fighting a regional war overseas. Now, on the other hand, high administration says this is typically the argument that we hear when you want to get more funds for the Pentagon. So be that. No less than Robert Blitzer, who's the acting section chief for domestic terrorism of the FBI, testifies that our investigations in the United States reveal no intelligence that state sponsors of terrorism, international terrorist groups, or domestic terrorist groups are currently planning to use these deadly weapons. The Defense Department, in a prepared statement by Brigadier Thomas Swain, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and Policy and Missions, includes a caution against exaggerating the nature of CB terrorist threat. The ability to create mass casualties by using chemical and biological weapons depends on many factors. Finding the right agent, weaponizing the agent, delivering the agent in an effective manner, and waiting for the optimal meteorological conditions would be a challenge to any terrorist group. We just need to keep in perspective the reality of recent and potential events. Last year in November, I had a personal conversation with John O'Neill, who's the FBI's chief of counterterrorism, and he said there's absolutely no threat of chemical and biological weapons in the United States. So I'll tell you what I know, and you can be the judge. In the paper, just August 3rd, New Fear, Anonymous Terrorism, Why Today's Bombers Hit and Then Hide. What I'd like to tell you is that at the end of this hour, if Terry McVeigh had known what you're going to know, he'd be in Acapulco, sipping margaritas. No one would even be looking for him. DCI Gates, of course, when he was head of the Central Intelligence Agency, I hope you can read this, he basically sees this as one of the big threats. We've heard a lot about the Soviet Union today, so you can put two and two together here for yourself. We know that Lawrence Livermore Lab has hired a few of them just to keep somebody else from hiring them, and it seems to be working pretty well. They put them on a payroll. Let's talk briefly about the types of chemical agents. The ones at the top left, of course, are the First World War era weapons. The blister gases, the choking gases. But it should be something to point out. Phosgene, for example, is a common hazard to firefighters. It's liberated in the burning of Teflon and certain of the plastics. It's very easy to make. And it causes a condition that we call dry land drowning, which is to say that the symptoms don't appear usually for about 20 to 24 hours, at which time your lungs fill up with water. On the nerve agents, is that in focus or is that just me? Oh, okay. All right. Well, you can read it. The nerve agents, those preceded with the G, were developed by the Germans, mostly by World War II. VX came along about 1950. It was first discovered by British scientists working at Porton Down. Porton Down is Britain's Aberdeen and Edgewood rolled into one. They had forsworn any use of any kind of chemical weapons. They gave it to us. We worked on it, developed it, and along came VX. VX is about 100 times more potent than its preceding G agents, of which there's soman, taboon, and sarin. Along lately now, another new development has come. The Russians have developed another one called Novichok, which means newcomer. Also a substance A232. It's classified. There's nothing I can tell you about it. It's very difficult to find out, but we know that they're actively engaged and proceeding along these lines, notwithstanding the fact that they have signed some conventions. I hope you can all read that. It tells you in plain language what a nerve agent is. It's a substance that causes the biological effects by inhibiting the enzyme acetylcholine esterase. That's what reduces the effect to neutral again. In the synaptic junction of your nerves, for those of you that are not remembering your biology, remember the nerve comes down to a synaptic junction. It's fired electrically and chemically across that synaptic junction by acetylcholine. The enzyme esterase, acetylcholine esterase, then neutralizes it. When this is inhibited, it causes the body to go into convulsions, shock, respiratory failure, and death. These are the countries that are, according to the Swedish Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, to possess these weapons. I'd say that basically this is a very short list. These that are suspected, I would move over into the first page and just add them as countries known. And as you've seen in the Tokyo subway incident, I might add that prior to this incident, our intelligence agencies and our FBI had no knowledge of Aum Shinrikyo before this event, even though it had 60,000 members scattered all over the world, twice as many in the Soviet Union as there were in Japan. In Op Plan 100290, that's the serial number 1002 for the year 90, this was the operations plan developed for fighting the Gulf War. If you can follow this scenario along the top line, this is a problem that we had to deal with. What if a Mirage jet flying from right to left, east to west, sprayed along a 220-kilometer line with the prevailing wind from the north pushing toward the south? How far would it drift and how fast? We figured whatever they would spray would drift 100 kilometers with a percentage coverage of 90% within about 9.3 hours. In 4.6 more hours, it would pass 50 more kilometers with a 50% coverage of the lower area. But if you'll notice that in the Gulf War, this is virtually most of the staging areas for what happened. Jubail, where I'd lived for 2 years, King Fahd Air Base, Dahran, where I was a hospital administrator, Sheikh Issa is the air base that the Marines used in Bahrain, and the island itself of Bahrain, which was a big staging area for all the British Air Force and some of us too. So these were the kind of things that we had to plan around. You've heard a few things about North Korea. Let me tell you about a briefing that my unit had in April '94. The briefing was delivered by Dr. Clark, Defense Intelligence Agency. At the time it was classified as secret. 6 weeks later, however, virtually everything we learned appeared in Time magazine. But at the time, the plan for attacking South Korea, Sakchan Sakyu, fast war, fast conclusion. As we were told at that time, North Korea had already infiltrated South Korea with special forces. They had their weapons, they had their explosives, they had their targets. When the whistle blew, they were to blow up bridges, crater runways, knock out communications, and assassinate certain individuals. In the meantime, along the DMZ, 1.1 million North Korean soldiers were poised, would launch the largest artillery barrage since Stalingrad, throw chemical shells into Seoul, create a panic among the civilians, drive them south, down the roads, choking the roads, so that no military forces could use the roads to come back up. In the meantime, South Koreans would be just overrun in 10 days, and the country would be pacified in 30 days. Now we have 38,000 troops there ourselves. What happens to them? You can only assume that they'd be dead or prisoners. In the meantime, North Korea would blackmail Japan against using any of our bases, so that we would have to stage out of Diego Garcia or somewhere far away. As you know, they can hit Japan with the missiles they have currently in their inventory. Now, the only thing that changed this scenario was in July, Kim Il-sung died. Now, he was the father. He had started the Korean War in 1950. He left it to his son. I don't believe he's been seen in public more than 3 or 4 times. We understand now that he's running the country with the help of about 5 generals and a few family members. In reality, probably the military is running it. We'll just have to wait and see. And we'll have a little more to talk about North Korea in just a little while. General Colin Powell felt pretty strongly about biological weapons. So let's talk a little bit about biological agents and their definition. They fall into 2 classes for those of you that aren't physicians or microbiologists. Bear with us a minute. The pathogens are microorganisms that cause diseases in animals or plants. A toxin is a substance, an organic substance that's poisonous to humans or animals. And biological warfare defined is the intentional use, underlying the intentional use of living microorganisms or toxic biological products to produce sickness or death in animals, crops, or humans. Let me read you just briefly some of the criteria of what would be an effective biological weapon. I want you to store this for a while because we're going to come back and use it in a little bit. The biological agent should consistently produce a given effect, either death or disease. The concentration of the agent, that is the infective dose, should be low. It should be highly contagious, and it should have a short and predictable incubation time from exposure to onset of the disease symptoms. The target population should have little or no natural or acquired immunity or resistance to the agent. Prophylaxis against the agent should be either not available or inaccessible to the target population. The agent should be difficult to identify in a target population, and little or no treatment for the disease caused by the agent should be available. So many of these things start out with typical flu symptoms, and we'll talk about that in a little while. The aggressor should have the means to protect their own people and their own forces against whatever agent to be used. It should be amenable to economical mass production. It should be robust and stable under production and storage, and it should be easily weaponized. And if delivered via an aerosol, it must survive and remain stable in the air until it reaches the target population. And after the delivery, the agent should have a low persistence, surviving only for a short time, thereby allowing a prompt occupation by troops. So we'll talk about anthrax in a while, why you maybe should or shouldn't use anthrax, mostly because of the persistence. In the bacterias, these are the various things that are readily available. You know them by these names. Anthrax is probably the most common. It exists worldwide. Those of you that toured Dugway the other day heard quite a bit about that, but for those of that you didn't, let's get you some word on this. It lives in the soil. It's fairly indestructible. The spores can survive boiling water and can live in the soil for decades. There's an area 500 square miles bigger than Rhode Island out at Dugway that's still off limits because of anthrax contaminations during tests during the 60s. Grenard Island off the northwest coast of Scotland was similarly contaminated during the 50s, but now it's been cleaned up by literally scraping the topsoil off the island. The accident at Sverdlovsk that you may remember in the Soviet Union, it caused an admitted 68 deaths. It may have caused as many as 1,200. The Russians were producing and weaponizing anthrax, and some got away. They stonewalled it, denied that anything had happened, thereby all the people that were receiving an infective dose died. Upon autopsy, their lungs were like jellied meat. Professor Matthew Meiselson of Harvard has calculated that the amount of anthrax that was lost in that could have been as little as a gram. A gram. A gram contains about 1 trillion spores, which is equivalent to 100 million lethal doses. What does it take to produce that much? As simple as a mason jar, a hot pad, and chicken soup. The cost, perhaps as little as $200. Saddam Hussein had weaponized anthrax and was prepared to use it in the Gulf War. And thinking about the lethality of that amount of a gram, that would kill 1/3 of the population of the United States if it could be efficiently disseminated. Cholera, it's of course often in the news. You see it quite often, particularly around Bangladesh and India. Outbreaks are a direct result of fecal contamination of water supplies, and in this you lose about 1/3 of your body weight in the first 24 hours. The rickettsia of particular note is Q fever or quarry fever. It's a disease of sheep and cattle. It's easily aerosolized and it's released into the wind to cause a serious illness. regarding typhus. In 1812, Napoleon set out to invade Russia with his grand army of 500,000 men. But by September, when he entered Russia, typhus had reduced his army down to 130,000 men. After engaging the Russian army in the following freezing Russian winter, only 30,000 men came home from the war. Of the fungi, those of you from California, of course, recognize valley fever, San Joaquin valley fever. It also is a spore that lives in the soil. We had an earthquake in 1994 that shook up the land out there and stirred up the spores, and we had an outbreak of this. It's usually as mild as a case of the flu or a cold, but every now and then it's fatal. Of the viruses, some of you have noticed quite a bit of press lately for things such as Ebola. This made it big with Richard Preston's new book, The Hot Zone. If you haven't read it, I'd certainly recommend you do. And then the movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman. A little far-fetched, but yet pretty educational, particularly as to how it might spread. It was first reported in Zaire, and it was due to the accidental infection by well-meaning Belgian nuns at the Yambuku Mission Hospital. Unsterilized, reused needles were used to give pregnant women their vitamin B shots, and much of the village and more than half of the nuns died. Ebola, like its cousin Marburg, it's a slate wiper. It kills just about everybody it touches. Its reservoir is still unknown, but it's believed to be in a monkey population. Lassa fever, it's named for the village in Nigeria along the border with the Cameroon. It was first identified in 1969. It lives in a wild rodent population and is seriologically related to lymphocytic choriomeningitis, Machupo, and Hunan, the latter named for the Machupo River in Bolivia and the Hunan River in Argentina. Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever is found in a wide belt from what is now Zaire to the Ukraine. The virus is transported around by camels, sheep, goats, and other cattle, and it's contracted by the bite of an infected tick, or infected meat, or blood, or close contact with an infected person. We believe that in the late 70s there was an outbreak in Baghdad that involved a lot of the Russian troops that were there as advisors, and they took a few deaths. It's been pretty hard to confirm the numbers. Russian spring-summer encephalitis is also spread by ticks. Dengue, yellow fever, and Rift Valley fever are transmitted by the bite of infected mosquitoes, and so also are the Eastern, Venezuelan, Western, and Japanese encephalitises. Most of these diseases are quite deadly, but rather fragile and not easily weaponized. And the hardiest of all these, of course, is influenza, and we've heard all about that. As you know, World War I killed 15 million people in a period of 4 years, but influenza killed twice that number in 6 months. In the United States, flu killed 550,000 people, which was 10 times our combat deaths. Today it's less fatal, but it's persistent and it's easily transmitted. But now, what if we were to splice some of the toxin genes to the influenza virus and weaponize that? It's not so far-fetched. Dr. Miller and I were talking. A friend of mine who's a microbiologist, MD, PhD at the University of Ceará in Brazil, says he believes it's all very quite possible, and probably somebody is quite near to it. At the top of this list is smallpox. Now, smallpox was officially eradicated from the face of the earth as a disease threat. Probably about 79 or 80 was the last case seen. And it was preserved only in a couple of highly secure laboratories, or so we thought, preserved at the Center for Disease Control, or CDC, in Atlanta, and at the Research Institute for Viral Preparations in Moscow, or Preparedness. It's also at a city called Novosibirsk. And quoting Howard Witt of the Chicago Tribune, who visited the institute in Moscow recently, he observed 2 pensioners serving as doormen, a few strands of rusted barbed wire atop a crooked fence, and an old alarm system linked to a distant police station, and that was all that stood between the deadliest virus known to man and any potential terrorists. On February 24th, 1993, the United States Senate hearing on, quote, the proliferation threats of the 1990s, published in its entirety a report released by the head of the then Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, Mr. Primakov. You've heard about him just a little while ago. You'll recall that Mr. Primakov, during the ramp-up for the Gulf War, went to meet with Saddam Hussein to try and persuade him to pull out of Kuwait, not for any particular humanitarian reason, but because Russian intelligence were quite aware that their client state was going to lose this war. Well, of North Korea, he said, and I quote, North Korea is performing applied military biological research in a whole number of universities, medical institutes, and specialized research institutes. Work is being performed in these research centers with inducers of malignant anthrax, cholera, bubonic plague, and smallpox. Now, biological weapons are being tested on the island territories belonging to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, end quote. Now, you'd ask yourself, why would they be doing this with smallpox? Well, again, think back to Sakchan Sakyu. If you could infect the population of South Korea with smallpox, how much easier would it make it to occupy and conquer that country? On the 23rd of May, just recently, a North Korean captain, Lee Choi-soo, flew a MiG-19 across the border asking for asylum, but in the course of his interrogation revealed that North Korea plans to attack South Korea this winter. Now we'll wait and see if that's accurate. We question in one way why he's flying a MiG-19. That's one of the oldest aircraft in the inventory. Why couldn't he brought out a 29 or something better? But maybe he didn't have access. Anyway, is he a plant? Is he disinformation? Who knows? We'll just wait and see. On the toxins, on the botulinum toxin, some of you will remember Operation Anthropoid. This was a plot to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich. He was the Nazi who was making the factories in Czechoslovakia hum just a little too well. British Special Operations Executive, SOE, trained and parachuted a team of 7 Czechs on the 29th of December, 1941. After watching Heydrich's comings and goings daily, they determined that he was as regular as clockwork, and they planned to ambush his car along the route that he followed daily. One of the operatives was a woman. She stood on a corner, and the signal was she took off her hat as the car came by, and at that moment then, Jan Kubis and Joseph Gabčík stepped off the curb to begin firing. Well, as Murphy would have it, the gun jammed, and everything just started to unravel. But Heydrich stood up in the car, went to draw his pistol, and at that time one of the Czech agents rolled a British number 73 anti-tank grenade underneath his car and exploded. The blast blew horsehair and springs and so forth into his body and severely wounded him. The assassins fled. Heydrich died 7 days later of what was termed to be septicemia. But what they didn't know was that he actually died of the botulinum toxin that Paul Fields of Porton Down is, as I say, like Edgewood, Aberdeen, and Dugway rolled into one. He died of the botulinum toxin that was coating the shards of the grenade. The toxin is 100,000 times more deadly than most of your nerve agents. A single ounce is sufficient to kill 60 million people. It can be produced for about $200 a pound. And you compare that with the cost that it would take to kill that many people with a nuclear weapon. The trichotoxin, this is produced by certain frogs in Colombia. You perhaps saw it in National Geographic. It's used by the Indians there to tip their darts. It's 25 times more deadly than cobra venom. Ricin, very, very interesting one here. This toxin is derived from the common castor bean. This grows ornamentally and wild all over California and many other states too. It's 100 times more deadly than cobra venom. You may remember the case of Georgy Ivanov Markov. He was a Bulgarian defector. He worked by day for the British Broadcasting Company, BBC, in London. But by night, he would broadcast political commentary on the current Bulgarian regime over Radio Free Europe. He had often received death threats, but in each instance, he would simply tell the caller that if he were killed, he would only become a martyr. But in August 1978, around midnight, he received a very chilling call that said he would not become a martyr, but he would die of a poison that the West cannot detect nor treat. He told some close associates, but a couple of days passed on, and he forgot about it. On September the 7th, he had taken a little walk at lunchtime, coming back across the water. He stopped on the top of Waterloo Bridge. He felt a sharp pain in the back of his right thigh. He turned and he saw a man stoop over and pick up an umbrella. The man looked at him and said, "Sorry," turned and got into a waiting taxicab. By nightfall, Markov was seriously ill and was dead in 4 days. Had it not been for a similar incident just 2 weeks previously in Paris, which also involved a Bulgarian dissident, Vladimir Kostov, it might have gone unnoticed. But Kostov's bulky sweater had saved him. In each case, a 1.52 millimeter spherical jeweler's watch bearing was found. Each had been cross-drilled and filled with 450 micrograms of ricin and coated with a wax that was to melt at body temperature. The British anti-terrorist squad had called in Dr. Robert Keeley of Portendown and Dr. Christopher Green of the CIA, and they made this discovery. Palitoxin. This comes from the genus Palithoa. It's a deadly seaweed. It was first found off of Hawaii, but it exists actually worldwide. Saxitoxin. This is a shellfish poison. It's produced by marine plankton that's responsible for the red tides. Shellfish concentrate it. After swallowing it or receiving it in a pinprick, death occurs in seconds. Saxitoxin was probably used to kill Vladimir Babchev, who was also known as Vladimir Simonov. He was found dead in his London home 2 weeks after Markov's death. He too was an outspoken critic of the ruling party in Bulgaria and its president, Zhivkov. So you see, the ideal poison for an assassin is one that does the job in the right amount of time and then metabolizes so that nothing shows in the autopsy. Francis Gary Powers carried saxitoxin. Its mercifully quick death was a better alternative than to the potassium cyanide caps that were previously issued to agents. He carried it in a silver dollar in the lining of his flight suit. The coin had a tiny drill bit, the grooves of which were filled with saxitoxin. However, when his U-2 spy plane was shot down, he chose to take his chances instead. As you know, was later returned in a swap for one of the Russian agents. Tetrodotoxin is a super poison that's produced by the newt, and you've probably heard about that in witch's brew. The T2 toxins. These have a very low molecular weight and can be absorbed through the skin. The Soviets developed a host of them, and they are probably one of the several compounds that was in yellow rain, which was used in Afghanistan and Southeast Asia.
Are those the biotoxins, the ergot?
Yes, that's part of yellow rain. It's that comes from that. Let me tell you a little bit about Unit 731 in Manchuria. I don't think you can see the header. Unit 731 Manchuria. In 1932, then Major Shiro Ishii of the Japanese Imperial Army Medical Corps set out to develop a biological warfare capability for Japan. Camps were set up in Manchuria, and soon the guinea pigs came. First they were Chinese and Russian prisoners of war, and then in 1942 they were Americans, Brits, and Australians. Of the tens of thousands who came, only a few hundred survived. Recently I had the privilege of introducing two of these survivors to the Far East Society, of which I'm a member, and this is Jim Bird and Frank James. They were captured at Bataan and Corregidor, respectively, and they saw their friends murdered along the Bataan Death March. Then they survived 30 days at sea in the hold of a cargo ship and arrived at Busan, Korea. From there they were moved overland to Unit 731 in Mukden, Manchuria to serve as slaves and guinea pigs. 3 years later they watched as 5 OSS agents parachuted in to free them. Russian troops arrived soon afterwards. Some of the American POWs went with the Russians and were never seen again. They probably joined about 12,000 other American POWs from German camps who were liberated by the Russians and simply vanished. During the Korean War, the surviving prisoners of World War II in Siberia were joined by 1,200 or more American POWs who were under KGB control. These included also air crews from the Cold War reconnaissance missions as reported by eyewitnesses in the 50s and 60s. I might add that of the backseaters that were shot down over Vietnam, that is the electronic warfare officers, that were known to be on the ground alive after being shot down, I don't believe that a single one of them was ever returned. They were moved to Russia for interrogation because of the knowledge they had. Russians didn't care about the pilots, they were basically just bus drivers, but they wanted the backseaters. There's an interesting book, it's fiction, you might want to read it sometime. It's called The Charm School, Nelson DeMille. You'll find it fascinating, and it has a little, it pertains a little to this. Well, at war's end, deals were cut, and General Ishii and the Japanese scientists were given amnesty to turn over all of the findings that they had on live subject testing, of course. Most returned to medicine and industry where they prospered. Not one was ever tried by the United States as a war criminal. There was no Japanese Nuremberg. This is a menu of biological weapons and their intended results. Death, if you wanted to exterminate a population, or maybe just to incapacitate them so that you would have slave labor to work in your factories, mines, and whatever you would need for them. I don't think you can read these, but anyway, it gives you a menu for choosing what weapons you might like to work with. These are, again, this is SIPRI. It's a very conservative list, but I think if we would use the word possess, the list, of course, would be much, much longer. So the question might be asked is, just what is the United States doing to protect its troops and its citizenry? Well, probably not much for the latter, but as for the military, just recently, DCI Deutsch has called chemical and biological warfare the most urgent threat to U.S. national security. So in June, 2 months ago, the U.S. Marine Corps activated its Chemical and Biological Incident Response Force. It contains 350 Marines and sailors geared to respond to such attacks against U.S. diplomatic missions and military installations worldwide. Also, there is a group called Task Force Scorpio. This is a disaster relief unit augmented by nuclear and chemical expertise of its members with, in the fields of anthrax, bot toxin, hemorrhagic fevers, and this Task Force Scorpio is placed at the disposal of the Secretary General of the United Nations. The mission of Scorpio, which is on a 24-hour standby, was and is to respond to an attack or an allegation of the use of biological weapons by flying to the area at the request of the Secretary General to determine what was used, if something was used, and also to start humanitarian relief. This is the view of Dugway coming in over the mountains. We didn't go that way the other day, but it's very pretty, but all of you can attest to how remote it is. It's the test site for detection and identification of chemical and biological weapons, and these days we use simulants for everything rather than using live agents or harmful chemicals. This is the chemical facility. As you can read, the sign says use of deadly force is authorized. Way out in the desert, several miles past there, this is an area they call the Twilight Zone. This is where I first encountered the security force. Little mistake on my part. I stopped on this hill. Another friend of mine, a Navy commander, and I were driving a rented car, unfortunately with Idaho plates. We had on Navy uniforms, which the Army couldn't begin to recognize. I stepped out of the car to take a picture, and suddenly there were blue lights everywhere, and I was taken into custody at gunpoint and escorted a few miles away to tell them why I was taking pictures of all this. It took me about 2 hours to get straightened out. So those of you that went to Dugway the other day, you understand why our cautions were about keep the cameras under wraps. And of course there everything is kept under lock and key. Those of you that took the tour saw this little machine. It's a machine made by the French company BioLafite. It's used here to make Bacillus globigi, which is what we use for testing for anthrax. That is, it mimics anthrax in every way. And this also, which is a 50-liter machine, this also comes in 20,000 liters. It's available on the world market. Barbara Johnson was telling us about the factory that they're trying to demill in Kazakhstan. It had 5 20,000-liter machines linked up side by side. So you can see what the production capabilities are of these things. As I say, it's available also on the world market to anyone who has the price. It's not that expensive. But then again, on a smaller scale, recall what I told you, an individual can put an organism and chicken soup into a mason jar and set it on a hot pad, and with a little patient produce large, deadly quantities of biological agents. The Army and the Navy and the Canadians are all engaged out here at Dugway, working very hard to come up with biological detection and identification systems. This is part of the Army's system. They've got it down to about 10,000 pounds now. It runs on shore power, and it takes 2 or 3 trucks to move it around. Those of you that saw the indoctrination film at Dugway noticed that there was a wheeled vehicle, all-terrain, that was called an NBC, for nuclear, biological, and chemical. Well, I must tell you that there is no B capabilities on that vehicle. Those haven't been developed yet. It can tell about nuclear and it can tell about chemical, but we're still a ways away from the B. They like to hide it too. This is the test grid that those of you that went out there did not get to see. We just simply ran out of time. But the spraying comes from the pipes. It's usually done at night about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when the meteorological conditions are at their best, moisture in the air, light breeze, and so forth. The Navy's unit, IBADS, Interim Biological Agent Detection System, don't we love acronyms, mounted on the left and the right with collector pipes going up high above the wheel's dust. This is a prototype model that we were testing some time back. It has a 5 kW generator, bumper mounted. It's all self-contained. Don't have a laboratory in it yet, but they're working on that. But this is a 4-wheel drive. It goes anywhere, and it performed quite well. The Air Force had a program they call Morning Song. It was based on fiber optics. They just totally gave up, and now they're buying these units from the manufacturer that makes them for the Navy. The interior of it, it works on a wet cyclone principle. It pulls down air and basically it brings it into a little jar. Then you pipette from that across a series of tickets. It worked pretty much like a pregnancy test. It's colloidal gold and has an emulsion over it. If it turns color, it indicates that that particular organism is present. I'm going to have to go back to gunnery school with this thing. I don't quite know which direction to point it. So far, the Navy's interim detection system is able to detect anthrax, plague, cholera, staphylococcus enterotoxin B, ricin, and botoxin A. I believe they've also qualified it now on tularemia and Q fever. This is the DoD mission needs statement. I know you can't read it, but basically what they're saying is that we need more vaccines, we need more capability in detection, and we need to get into physical production and also pay attention to decontamination procedures. Essentially, they're kind of throwing money at it right now, so it's a good time for them out here. You saw the new building being built across from Baker Lab, so you'll see what they have to work with. These are the vaccines developed so far by the U.S. Army, and the vaccines for anthrax, which is certainly the most painful shot I've ever had, Q fever, plague, you can read the others. This is the suit that I just unwrapped and laid on the table here. I'd invite you to come and look at it later. It's useless when it gets wet, and it's fortunately going to be replaced pretty soon by what's called the Joint Service Integrated Lightweight Suit. This is a suit that was made from a matrix. All of the various forces submitted what their requirements would be in a suit, and they decided on some common denominator, so it'll probably beat nobody's expectations, but it's coming out. The Marines, being Marines, they've departed from this already, and they've gone to what's called a Saratoga suit. It comes in the camouflage patterns of white, desert, and woodland. It's lined with spherical carbon. It doesn't rub off on your fingers. It's somewhat waterproof, and you can wear it just as an outer garment like you would your utilities. This particular mask here is the current issue. This is called the MCU-2P. It has a curved lens. It has a filter that screws on either side depending on whether or not you're a left or a right shooter. It has a little drinking tube in it that plugs into a O-ring in your canteen so that if you're in a contaminated environment, you can slowly get a drink of water.
And the biggest problem with it is that when you're talking, nobody can tell what you're saying.
As I was saying, the biggest problem with this is that when you're talking, nobody can tell what you're saying. There is a little adapter in here for a voice emitter, but it's not commonly issued.
You want me to pass that around?
Sure. This is the Saratoga suit in the woodland pattern, but particularly I want you to notice on this Marine's shoulder, on his straps here, this little thing that looks like a little cassette. This is an individual chemical agent detector, another acronym ICAD. It can be also rigged up for a remote sensing unit, hooked up to a radio, so you can put it around a perimeter so that if nerve agents come blowing in, it'll set off an audible alarm. In this case, this one will also. By the time that alarm goes off, though, we try and tell everybody, do not take even one more breath. Get your mask on and clear it. And we expect everybody to be able to get that mask on in 10 seconds. 2 seconds is better. We have the atropine and 2-PAM chloride injectors that on the top. The problem is that you have to be pretty careful about the order you give these and the quantity you give them. So if you've got somebody that's down, they're exposed, they're going into convulsions, they or their buddy may not remember how many of these they took. Corpsman comes along, maybe assumes that needs to put one more in them. Corpsmen usually write on their forehead what they've done, so if they go on back through the collection lines, everybody else that receives them knows a lot what was done. Problem is with bullets flying, you can't remember if you took one of these or two of those, or was it two of those or one of those. And that's not a mistake you want to make. So we've gone now to the auto injector. It carries everything. It has a spring-loaded needle. It just plunges right into your thigh. So it's a lot more foolproof. I know that somebody's going to ask about this. Pyridostigmine. This is the suspected, at least, as one of the culprits in Gulf War syndrome. It's a blister pack of tablets, 30 milligrams. As many of you physicians know, it's been used for years to treat myasthenia gravis, I believe it is. But this is made in the Netherlands. It's, of course, not FDA approved. I don't think it ever could get through the testing. But it's given as a nerve agent pre-treatment, usually on the order of somebody at either the Schwarzkopf or the Boomer level, when intelligence would indicate that you are probably soon going to be hit with an attack of nerve gas. This is a 7-day supply, and you just keep taking them until they're used up. Now, the thing that sort of makes this suspect, along with some other things, and I must tell you that there's a study commissioned at Duke University by the DoD to look into this, Gulf War syndrome. But the interesting thing about it is that The British have cases and we have cases. The French don't and the Saudis don't. Well, the Saudis and the French didn't take it. So it is at least one of the common denominators, others being, you know, an accumulation of fast-acting vaccines and also DEET, the insect repellent. We can pass this around if anybody wants to see it. I might add too, before I go on, that mask that you just are passing around is now made out of silicone rubber. Our mask used to be made out of a black butyl rubber, but the Soviets developed an additive that they could put into anything that they dropped on you that would melt that butyl mask on your face. So we had to go to silicone that was a little more resistant. So I think the biggest problem, though, is that any use of chemical or biological weapons are not so likely to be used on military, who are much better prepared for this. I think the worst of it is it'll be civilians. In the Tokyo incident, for example, just to tell you how that went, a baggie full of sarin and 2 members of the Aum Shinrikyo cult boarded trains, 5 trains converging on the downtown station where the police academy was in downtown Tokyo at rush hour. Now, any of you that have been in Japan in a subway, you know it's a sardine experience at best. Well, they punched holes in these bags with sharp-tipped umbrellas, and you know, a little gas kind of got up in the air, others kind of flowed out on the floor. As a result, 12 people were killed and several hundred other were affected. But had they stood on the end of the platform when a train was coming down the tube, a piston pushing air, if you would, if they had stood on the end of the platform with an ordinary paint sprayer and sprayed that into the air, that pushing air crossing the platform would have killed everybody, plus most of the rescuers trying to come in. An agent like VX, if you have a copper penny in your pocket, pull that penny out and take a look at the Lincoln Monument. A droplet big enough to touch 2 columns is a lethal dose, LD50, a lethal dose for 50% of the people. So you can see what a paint sprayer would have done. Now you think about aerosolizing something like this, the common ordinary aerosol tanks even that crop dusters and others used, strapped on the wing of a plane. This is one of the big fears, of course, in Atlanta, that somebody might do this over a stadium full of people. I might also add that on the case of Aum Shinrikyo, not only did they have 60,000 members, mostly in Russia and Japan, but they also had $1 billion in assets. Their goal was to pit the United States and Japan into a war of Armageddon from which they, the cult, would arise to take over. Well, I wish I could end this part on a happier note, but as I've told you, these things are readily available. Saddam Hussein and many others have used this organization, ATCC, American Type Culture Collection. This is the ordering manual for all things bacteria. This is virus. The bacteria manual looks about like the LA phone book. And in it, it will tell you, for example, of what you can order. Like here's West Nile fever. This is the source. This is the blood of a patient taken in Uganda. 1937. It's still there. It's frozen. And it can be sent to you, if you qualify, freeze-dried FedEx. And to make it even simpler, now I must tell you things are tightening up, but to make it even simpler, the forms that you want to fax in are in the book. It costs nothing to obtain the book but a phone call. The forms are there. All you have to do if you're a terrorist is lie a little bit. Yes, of course I'm qualified. Yes, of course I work in a laboratory. I'm researching on Q fever, whatever you might have. You probably saw in a paper not too long ago where Larry Wayne Harris did just that. He ordered plague bacillus, which wiped out 1/3 of Europe. He ordered it. It came to him FedEx, freeze-dried. Fortunately, the woman on the other end of the phone that took the order was suspicious, thank God. She called the FBI. They were waiting when the FedEx truck drove up, and they took him into custody. His trial began the 28th of May. So, I'm glad I didn't go any further than just ordering the books. This is another interesting little book. Has a cute name, Assorted Nasties. This is published by Delta Press in El Dorado, Arkansas, who also published many things like ammonium nitrate and fuel oil bombs. And there's quite a list in the back. But the important thing about this is that I ordered it by a phone call, put it on my credit card, cost me $13.95. It was in my mail the next week in a plain brown envelope. Now, what I would tell you about this, it has the recipes for 22 of the most deadly poisons and toxins known to man, including sarin, including VX, including ricin, and a host of others. For example, what you need to make cyanide is simply washing soda, charcoal briquettes, and rust. Now, if you can bake an angel food cake, you can do this one. If you can run an illegal drug lab, you can do most of the rest. But these are the homebrew recipes for making these, and it's just incredible. I'll pass this around in case any of you want to order one. But in here it has another little shortcut for those of you that might not have been chemistry majors. A simple thing like a nose spray bottle filled 50-50 with DMSO and the insecticide parathion, squirted on your body, is a killer. Also in the back it tells you how to make some of these things, how to turn your felt pen into a lethal instrument, and a few little launchers. You'll find this kind of interesting. We see more and more things coming up as far as terrorism, and let's talk about that just briefly. Any chance of focusing that a little better? Second from the left, Brigadier General Mohammed Omar Hassan al-Bashir. He was attending one of our U.S. Central Command exercises, and his entourage there. This was, I guess this was August of '88. And it was my job, seeing as how I'd lived in that part of the world for so many years and knew some of the language and the customs, it was my job to brief the Arabic and Muslim countries that were visiting. Among them was the Brigadier. A bright, articulate man, very precise British English. He's a graduate of Sandhurst, which is Britain's two-year West Point. And spent some time with him. We had some tea. He had some very piercing, penetrating questions, and I was quite impressed by him. So much so that I wasn't really surprised, now that I think back about some of his questions. About 6 or 7 months later, I pick up the paper and see that he's overthrown the government, and he's now its president. And he still is. But just to make matters worse, he brought in a friend of his, Sheikh al-Turabi, who has very, very close links with Iran, and they proceeded then to set up terrorist training camps in the Sudan. We know of at least 30. One of the camps, in fact, has at least 30,000 Iranians in it. Now, what they do is they recruit the disenfranchised, unemployed, restless youth of many of these countries out here, Algeria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and so forth. They bring them in and train them, and then they send them back to their countries to destabilize and overthrow the government. Of course, the goal is to set up an Islamic fundamentalist republic. These are some of the multinational Islamic Front groups. I'm sure you can't read them all, but Hezbollah, of course, is one of the more active. His party, Allah, of God. This is a group that's been operating under Iranian sponsorship for some time. They get a lot of money from Iran, and they are just spread everywhere. The International Muslim Brotherhood is also spread everywhere, very, very active. Algeria, news clipping, Saturday, August 3rd, just the other day, yesterday. Bishop assassinated. Bishop Pierre Claverie, the French-born head of the Diocese of Oran, Algeria, was assassinated Thursday by a bomb just hours after returning from a ceremony honoring 7 French monks who were slain by Algerian terrorists. At the ceremony, he met with French foreign minister and so forth, and the two discussed the safety of the clergy, where now 19 priests, monks, and nuns have been killed since 1992. Algeria, of course, the Islamic fundamentalist groups are trying to overthrow the government and move toward a fundamentalist republic. Egypt, there's been a number of murders. Recently, you remember, where a busload of people that were boarding the bus at Giza to go to visit the pyramids were machine gunned by a carload of terrorists. The tourists were mistaken for Jews. They were actually Greeks. Shot them all up. There was an incident at the coast, on the Red Sea coast near Hurghada. For those of you that are divers, it's one of the favorite diving areas. But in this case, I think there were 2 or 3 Germans that were shot up by terrorists and killed. Egypt is having a lot of incidents. There's a lot of unrest. They're trying to overthrow President Mubarak. And as they come back to the country, he just can't hang them fast enough. Ethiopia, of course, you've been following what's going on there. Now, it's beginning to settle down. In fact, I have some friends that have been adopting Ethiopian children, so things are getting a little better there. Jordan, we used to do a lot of exercises with them, and the first thing you notice when you're in Jordan is about 60% of the people that live there are Palestinians with Jordanian passports, and they have strong loyalties. Had a lot also for Iraq, which gave President Hussein of Jordan a really tough time. Hamas, you see them in the paper almost every week. But I want you to notice the spread of this. It's Kashmir, India, they're in Malaysia, everywhere. Jama Islamiyah at Libya, Pakistan, very active groups, even to the Philippines. Syria, the Muslim Brotherhood, they've been active for quite a long time. Yemen. Anyway, those are the things I wanted to tell you, and I think we've got some time for questions if you would like.
Do you give any credence to Sterling Seagrave's book, Yellow Rain?
Yes. Yes, I've read it a couple of times, and it's a pretty nice piece of work. In fact, it's on my recommended list for reading over here. Have you read it?
Yes, I have.
What's your feeling about it?
I recommend it very highly.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to find. You've got to search around a little bit to find it because it's been out of print for a while.
It seemed to be taken out of the local libraries that I've checked lately.
Oh, yeah. Another one is a higher form of killing.
Yes.
And that's on this list too. So those of you that would like a little more reading on the subject, please feel free. Also, as I mentioned, there are some sheets up here on how to treat nerve agents and also where to order things and buy the DSN, that is the defense serial number of atropine and so forth.
Being a local resident and potentially downwind from our nice neighbors out in the desert, some time ago I was given a homegrown recipe to be able to, as a civilian, resist with my family and little children. First of all, with the little children, I've not been able to find adequate gas masks for small size infants and up. Any solutions?
Well, the problem is, of course, that most of the gas masks are made for soldiers.
That's correct.
And there is a gentleman here, though, that knows about gas masks. Where is he? Is he still here? Can...
I know a little about what the Israelis did. They had little pet-like structures, and the mother or the father would pump it, air through it. They had a whole array, even for bearded Jews, that couldn't close the gas mask on their bearded face.
One of the sad...
That doesn't help us then.
Yeah, one of the sad things that happened during the Scud attacks of Israel, and it shows you how a population will panic, not only for explosives, but particularly for chemical agents. Masks were issued to civilian population, but unfortunately there wasn't a lot of time to tell them all how to use it. And there was at least 2 persons that I remember reading about that suffocated inside their mask because they didn't know to pull off the foil tab to let the air flow. That's fear.
With the homegrown recipe, Will this work with the GB and VX agents, or the G agents and the VX agents? I was told that there's approximately a 2-week life of those particular agents, and that soapy water mixed with a chlorine solution is the primary factors for breaking that agent down. Yay or nay?
That's true. The first thing you want to do with anything, of course, is soap and water and then household chlorine bleach. The biggest problem, though, with all of them is inhalation.
With that, the individual recommended duct tape around doors and windows.
Yes.
In any air seepage areas.
Yes.
This homegrown recipe could potentially work until wind diluted it.
Sure. Sure. Many of these agents have a low persistence, that is sunlight and wind, humidity, rain. These things sort of wash them out.
And the last question deals with LSD and other hallucinogens placed in water supplies as a terrorist act. Would you please address that?
The problem with polluting a water supply with ricin or any other thing like that is the sheer volumes that you'd need to transport. When you look at most reservoirs, you know, the reservoirs are in the hundreds of billions of gallons, and you would have to truck in some pretty heavy doses. So they don't see that so much as a threat. You would have to get closer to the user than the reservoirs. You know, the closer you can get to the user, the more effective it would be.
Even with an hallucinogen?
Don't know a whole lot about LSD. I grew up during that time, but I never took it, and I didn't inhale.
My hair was so short.
Yes, sir.
So I'd just like to comment on the murder of Georgi Markov.
Yes.
With an umbrella with a stick up his backside on Westminster Bridge. The perpetrator or controller of this event was Oleg Kalugin, who is persona grata in the United States. Not only is he persona grata, but a number of people I know have been talking to him. He goes to parties, he gives lectures, and so on. When he went to Britain, he was briefly arrested at Heathrow Airport and suddenly released. Have you any idea of why this man, who is a very senior KGB officer, is allowed free rein in your country and in fact hasn't been put behind bars?
No, I don't know. I just don't know. We just know that deals are made for information and trades and so forth. It's like the incident of the Jennifer Project, if you recall, when the good ship Glomar Explorer actually raised most of a Russian submarine off of the bottom of the ocean, which was an impossible feat. But included in that was the code books, which enable the NSA to break warehouses full of code that they had not broken before. I would imagine that anyone coming across like that, they're going to milk them for all the information they can, and of course they have to protect them. But that'd be the only reason I would know. Yes, sir?
Steve Coakley from Utah. I was just wondering if there was any significance to the three-circle emblem that you had behind the list of diseases.
That's the biological hazard symbol. This one right here. It's just to mark biological hazards. It's an international symbol. It's just like a road sign or anything else. Uh-huh.
It's just like a question earlier, I don't know if you were asked about gas masks for children.
Yeah.
I saw in a catalog within the past year, I don't remember which catalog, but there are some former Soviet gas masks in the market that are small enough for children.
Okay.
Various different, if you find anything mail order from any of the various different sportsmen's mail order catalogs, you wind up getting on mailing lists. You wind up getting all kinds of catalogs on everything that got to be heard.
Yes.
Like I say, I can't remember which catalog.
Okay.
They are available.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm Bob Ferris from Oregon. You mentioned DMSO and parathion, I believe it was.
Yes.
Was that as an insect repellent or
As a lethal weapon.
as a lethal weapon?
Yeah, DMSO 50/50 with the insecticide parathion squirted on your bare skin is a lethal weapon.
Well, okay.
One more police question. One of my sources at Tooele Dugway area commented on the masks of the Vietnam era that they were issuing, that those masks they found between 7 and 8 out of every 10 had minor pinhole pricks in the butyl rubber and were unacceptable. Can you verify that data?
Vietnamese masks?
Those are the Vietnam era masks,
Okay.
the normal mask that comes over with the double filter system. They cannot be exchanged except by death.
Yeah. It could well be true. One of the things in training that you always do when they issue your mask is put it on, clear it, make sure it breathes properly. If it doesn't, you want to turn it back in and pick up one that does. That mask usually travels with you then, but it's usually your responsibility to make sure it works properly.
These were the new masks that had been issued to them, apparently faulty manufacturing.
Yeah. Well, it certainly can happen. I'm sure that not everything is tested as well as we'd like. So they depend on the soldiers to more or less check out their own. It's their life.
The concern being, as far as civil defense civilians, the unreliability of equipment that is supposedly good, then perhaps it really may not be at all and quite faulty.
Well, if you put it on and cover the filter and inhale, it should collapse on your face. If you get a rush of air, it's faulty. So you just have to go through the pile and make sure you pick out good ones.